Oh, hey, oh, what's up? You want to ride a big power motorcycle, huh? You think you're ready to step up to something with King Kong power? Big boy stuff, huh? Talking 1000cc plus, 180 horse plus, the kind of top of the castle. There's a few intricacies that comes with riding a big power motorcycle that I want to tell you guys about today. In case you're trying to step up to the big categories, the big leagues, so to speak, there's a lot of stuff that you may not realize about a motorcycle with so much power, such as this Aprilia 210 V4 that I'm currently off-roading, which is actually our giveaway bike on GamingNoob.co. Go and check that out in the link down below. And become a member, support the show, join the community, and you'll get entered to win this big power motorcycle. I hope you're ready for it, because I really don't want this thing to go to some beginner who's going to wad it up in the first corner that they reach, but that may happen. So when you're moving from the entry or intermediate category into the gorilla stuff, as I call it, the big stuff, the first thing you may notice is weight. A lot of big power motorcycles obviously are a lot heavier. This 210 in particular weighs about 460 pounds, which, not that anyone would ever do this, but if you're coming from like a Ninja 400, 500, those weigh in the mid 300s. A lot of middleweight stuff weighs about 400. So there's a reason why these are kind of called heavyweight, the big bikes, because they are generally bigger and heavier, but that doesn't hold true for all of them. A lot of stuff like the Street Fighter V4, for example, is a lot lighter. I think the MT-10 is about the same kind of weight, and that presents a few challenges. First of all, in riding in slow speeds, these motorcycles tend to be a little unwieldy. This one, for example, has a really shallow steering sweep, so when you try to turn it lock to lock, it doesn't really turn a whole lot. Because the thing about big bikes is that they just want to go straight. They pretty much just want to pile on speed in a straight line. So you end up riding them quite differently, particularly on track, but this can apply to on-road too. You don't really do like swoopy, sweepy stuff with the big power bikes. What you end up doing is riding them in kind of a point and shoot way, You sort of take the motorcycle and accelerate really aggressively, pick it up on the fat side of the tire, and then brake really hard in a straight line, tip it in, and get the hell out of the corner. That's not to say you can't ride them in this kind of like swoopy way like I'm doing right now in this really beautiful left-hander into a right-hander. Like, they'll do that, but not at proper pace. They're much better at get in, get out, point and shoot, because they just want to go straight. They're very heavy, and the other thing about it too is since the engines are larger, the crankshafts are larger. The crankshafts are heavier, and if you don't know, the crankshaft is what connects to the rods and the pistons all the way down at the bottom of the engine. It's the final rotating part all the way at the bottom that ultimately connects to the output shaft and the gearing and the transmission and then the chain and out to the power, right? That is one of three very important gyroscopes on the motorcycle, right? You have front wheel, rear wheel, and you have the crankshaft in the middle. Now, when the crankshaft is big and when it's heavy, it resists turning. We did a really great deep dive on this about 2 years ago about V4s versus inline 4s, and I explained to you guys how an inline 4 has a long crankshaft, right? And it resists turning because it's long and it's rotating really fast. V4s are a little bit better, but ultimately, because the crank is heavier, the bike seems to resist turning a little bit more. So when you jump on these bikes, particularly like the 1000s that have the really long gears and all the other factors I just talked about, and they have a very committed riding position, it's why we kind of joke and call them piss missiles, because really all they are just intercontinental ballistic missiles that just want to go straight. And when you're managing them side to side, key word there being managing, all you're doing is just trying to get them to the point where you can get them back upright and just back on the power and using what they're good at, which is just producing ungodly amounts of horsepower in a straight line, which is why most of them are designed for racetracks and carving corners. But I kind of get why they end up as just like highway roll racing bikes, because they're extremely good at just being this fine little needle that just threads space and time in a straight line. That's what they want to do. So once you start to understand that about the big power bikes, you you start to be able to ride them in the way that they want to be ridden, right? They don't appreciate aggressive inputs side to side. They resist a lot of turning from side to side. When you're riding them slow speeds in parking lots, you'll probably find it a bit awkward, because really the only thing you want to do with the bike, like I said, is just get it upright, point and shoot, and get on the gas. Right, so those are some of like the downsides or kind of stuff you got to think about when you're going from the little bikes to the big bikes. But there are some humongous benefits to riding a big bike. The key among them is, just the engine. The engine is much larger, so you have a ton more torque everywhere. You don't have to work for power ever. You can be very lazy. You don't have to think about what gear you're in, especially on the street, and sometimes even on track, honestly. I've ridden really big, powerful motorcycles where I found myself in the wrong gear at the wrong time, and it didn't really matter. I was just able to, power out, and it affected the lap time marginally. Of course, I wasn't racing the bike because I'm not a complete lunatic. I've never raced a 1000cc bike. I don't have the stones to do that. That requires a certain type of animal, and I am not that animal. So you have torque virtually everywhere, particularly in the new generation of hyper-nakeds and leader bikes that not only do they have 1000cc's, but a lot of them are plus size. Like this one is a 1099cc V4, and V4s are already known for being more linear in the way they produce power. They're not very peaky. The Ducati V4 is a little different because it's set up to be more of a top-end motorcycle, so it has a ton of top-end grunt. But again, the MT10, the Super Duke, all these bikes have a lot of mid-range and low-down grunt, such that, you could be here 3,000 RPM, which on a motorcycle is absolutely lugging it, in fourth gear. You crack open the throttle, and I am right behind this car. I had the throttle open at 50% for maybe 2 seconds, and you guys saw that increase in speed. I mean, that's the thing about these bikes, is you have to really recalibrate your brain to how quickly they pick up speed. They pick up speed so fast, and if you're not ready for that, it's going to be quite the jump. So I'll try to show you again. I'm behind this car. I got another car behind me right here. The road's going to straighten up a little bit here. I'm in third at that 3,000 RPM, fourth gear, 37 miles per hour. We're going to go wide open. 1, 2, 3, and that's 55, 60 miles an hour. It was still accelerating when I shut it off. That's in fourth gear at 3,000, guys. So that's something to keep in mind. They're way faster, produce way more torque virtually everywhere. And that's a huge benefit to them on the street. Like, a lot of 600s and smaller bikes, yes, they have some torque, especially the middleweight twins. They're pretty punchy. But if you want something that just has, like, great power everywhere, you're going to want to look at the hyper-naked category. You're not going to want to get a middleweight bike. If you want proper power basically everywhere all the time, you're going to have to get something like this. Now, the other way that the big bikes are different is the auditory sensations, right? So up until somewhat recently, a lot of these big power bikes, I wouldn't say somewhat recently, it's been a while since we've had mass market V4s and all that sort of thing, but to get this sort of sound, you had to usually go for something pretty exotic. Everything was inline fours. But now, twins and triples kind of dominate the middleweight category. But if you want the V4 soundtrack, you have to get a big bike. There's no way for you to get a motorcycle that, has this sonorous soundtrack without going V4. And that might be a deal breaker for a lot of you guys. I see the comments a lot of times, like, "Damn, why are you recommending this triple or this twin? I need a 4-cylinder, I need the V4, I need that sound." And there's only a few bikes on the market that give you the 4-cylinder sound in a somewhat reasonable package. And Kawasaki's got you covered there. You can get the ZX4, the ZX6. Those all have the classic inline 4 sound for not crazy amounts of power. But if you want a V4, you got to go big. And the other big benefit to riding a large motorcycle like this is that you get really top-end components, right? If you're looking to get a motorcycle that has all the rider aids, the semi-active suspension, all the good stuff that lets you just not really think too much about your traction on the street, it's the big power stuff. They all have the really advanced suite of electronics, the electronic suspension, all the good stuff that helps keep it manicured. But then there's times where I kind of think like, well, you bought this motorcycle with with all this horsepower, and you're just letting the computer tell you when and where you can use that horsepower. And a lot of times it ends up just feeling like a middleweight naked bike because it's so neutered a lot of the time. Which is kind of silly, but you still get the audio from it though, which is really cool. So even if you're riding and you're like, hey, you know what, it's pretty neutered, but at the same time, like, it does sound pretty delicious, doesn't it? The other thing too, that if you're jumping up, especially from like entry level or like kind of like lower intermediate level to like proper motorcycle like this, it's the brakes. So these have giant 330 mil rotors, radial calipers, radial pull master cylinder. You can stop on a dime with these motorcycles. And that's an input that if a beginner rider doesn't have that finesse, you can really get into trouble with way too much brakes mid-corner, or if you're stabbing the brakes mid-corner, because while there is a lot of safety tech on these motorcycles, they have cornering ABS and all that stuff, a lot of the technology is reserved for the application of throttle and power. The brakes are relatively rudimentary. Like I said, you have cornering ABS and some of those other features. Some of the Ducati products, they have the really advanced stuff where it, for example, like actuates the rear brake mid-corner to help the bike turn, but that's really more of a racetrack thing. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, if you have really bad inputs on the brakes, you can get into a lot of trouble on these bikes. You can really crash them fairly easily. If you're mid-corner and you stab the brakes, you're going to crash. They don't really have safety systems that'll save you from that. You could probably on some of these bikes, mid-corner, add a bunch of gas, and the computer will probably sort it out for you, depending on how much gas you ask for. If you ask for a ton of gas, it probably will still spin and slide and spit you off. But the brakes are really one that you got to watch out for. So if you're jumping up to the big bikes, yeah, you got to really mind those brakes. One thing that may surprise a lot of you guys, this back in the day was a little different, but nowadays the big bikes, while I did say that they're heavy, dimensionally they're not that big. Like this 210 V4 is not too much bigger than a 210 660. It's a little bit wider in the gas tank, and I got a little bit more fairings up at the front, but that's about it. This is a motorcycle that has a ridiculous amount of power in a relatively pint-sized package. So that might shock you too, to ride this thing and be like, damn, it doesn't really feel that much bigger than a middleweight bike. You're like, yeah, okay, it feels a little heavier. And then you get on the gas, you're like, oh my God, it has so much power. I think also the leader bikes, the heavyweight bikes, particularly those that are fully faired, you should probably prepare yourself to get a lot of attention. Sometimes unwanted, unwarranted attention. You might enter a situation where people want to race you on the highways, or they see you at a stoplight and they ask you to rev, people ask you to wheelie. That's pretty common when you have like a top shelf flagship motorcycle. If you've got a brand new Yamaha R1, you've got a Ducati Panigale, BMW S1000RR, like the real fancy, flashy stuff, you'll get into a situation where people are constantly asking you to rev it or wheelie it or do whatever. The Hypernakeds fly much more under the radar, which is why I personally really like them, because they're more comfortable to ride. They have basically the same level of performance on the street anyways, and you kind of fly under the radar without people wanting to constantly race you or do dumb stuff like that, Oh, the other thing about big bikes, once you step up to them, they basically ruin you for everything else. I've owned lots of Hypernaked motorcycles for giveaways here on the channel. I've owned the Turbo Hayabusa H2. I've owned some really, really fast bikes. And basically, once you accrue enough experience with the really fast stuff, it can be a good or a bad thing, right? Because I jump back down to the middleweight naked category, the entry-level category, and they kind of feel like toys, which is a good thing, because then you get to ride them sort of as hard as you want and as fast as you want, and they never really feel that dangerous. You're like, oh, this is a fun little bike, this is great. Like, basically, to me, anything with like 100 to 120 horsepower, it doesn't feel fast at all anymore. And that only happened because I just continuously kept doing, I knew that guy was going to go for it. I just continuously kept doing, like bigger and bigger power stints on other motorcycles. And you come back to the smaller power stuff and you're kind of like, you know, like it's not that fast. So be prepared for it to break your brain a little bit, especially when you jump up to the big power. Oh, the other elephant in the room, of course, not to make a size pun there unintentionally, is that your insurance rates are going to skyrocket. If you are under the age of 30, if you're not a homeowner, if you're not married, if you don't have the stuff that insurance agents like to see to show that you are a reasonable, good human being who has a lot to lose in life, you're going to pay a fortune in insurance. I've seen some crazy quotes on our Discord server with guys who are, you know, they're young, they're in their early 20s, they're single, and they're like, damn, I want to get an R1 or an S1000, but they're quoting me $600 a month for insurance. And I'm like, yep, sounds about right. Because, you know, you are the absolute worst demographic to own a high-powered sport bike. That's the last thing that an insurance agent will want to see. So it may actually shock you, and I would highly recommend, before you buy your motorcycle, do some quotes for the insurance, because it actually may push you out of the realm of being able to afford the bike. If you know, you've looked at it, you're like, I got my gear, I got the payments, whatever, I got the cash for the bike. If you're not ready to dole out serious money in insurance, you know, that might be a deal breaker for you when you jump up. Because the thing too is, you know, you kind of need the proper insurance for these things. Like, I really don't recommend buying a super powerful motorcycle and then you end up with liability insurance or whatever. Because I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you're definitely at a higher risk level riding one of these things. Ooh, squirrely on the tire. It's weird I didn't have grip back there. Oh well. Let's hang a right and let her eat a little bit, huh? Make sure there's nobody. Okay. Such a treat to ride a big power bike. And that's my final point for today is you owe it to yourself to at least one point in your life own a stupid motorcycle. You have to, at some point in your riding career, own something that scares you a little bit. Because that's how you grow. You know, if you've been riding the entry level, the middleweight stuff, you got adventure bikes, whatever, like, try something new, man. Try something with just like a god tier amount of power. And just ride it for a year, see how you feel, because it'll add experience points to your treasure chest of motorcycling. And you'll be able to then, like I said, jump back to something else, and you'll be like, oh, this isn't that fast. Like, I rode a Tuono V4 for a year. Like, that was great. And then you can jump back to something more normal and be like, oh, this is awesome, you know? But yeah, I always, man, every time I get these hyper naked bikes, they're really fast stuff. This one in particular has been such a joy to own and ride for the giveaway. And I'm gonna be really sad when this one leaves. This has been one of my absolute favorite bikes that I've owned in a long, long time. And it just reminds me that, yeah, like, I'm so glad that the super powerful bike still exists and that people can own them and ride them and enjoy them. But you gotta do so responsibly and kind of know what you're getting into, you know? So boys, that's gonna wrap up today's vlog on jumping up to a big powerful bike. I think I covered all my bases. I kind of tried to think holistically from someone going from, you know, about 100 horsepower to 180 and kind of how that's gonna go. So let me know down below in the comments if you've made the jump, if you want to make the jump, what you're thinking about, what you're worried about. Ride these responsibly, enjoy them. They are a beautiful machine. Is that a freaking Model T up there? We'll end this vlog on a bit of a weird note. I think we have a 100-year-old classic up here. Wow, look at that thing. Anyways, appreciate you guys checking out today's show. We'll catch you in the next one. See you later. Wow, how cool. That's crazy.